Hi, and welcome to the X22 Report Spotlight. Today we have a new guest, Jim Willie. Jim is the editor of the Hat Trick Letter. He is highly regarded as one of the leading experts on the gold and silver market. He is also highly regarded for his forecasts on currency-related collapses, bank defaults, predictions for gold and silver prices. You can find all of his work on thegoldenjackass.com, and I am very happy and actually honored to have him on the X22 Report Spotlight. Jim, welcome to the Spotlight.
Oh, it's good to be on this the first time, and just so people aren't confused, it's www.goldenjackass.com. No "the" in there. So goldenjackass.com, that's where you can find it. I'm the editor of the Hat Trick Letter, and it's been 12 years and a few months, and my goodness, time flies. This is not exactly having fun, but it is certainly stimulating times.
Oh, it definitely is. And I wanted to start off with the European banks. And we see that they were just stress tests, and we know the Italian bank is in trouble. Seems like it might be a Portugal bank that's in trouble. Deutsche Bank, we've been hearing a lot about all of this. I mean, are these European banks, are they insolvent?
Oh, they're dead. I mean, what's keeping them running is the phony money. And here's a very big true point about economics and finance. These banks, the leading banks in the West, the big banks, they're all dead. They're all insolvent. And they all would have been plowed under with bank failures if it weren't for quantitative easing by the Fed. QE is not stimulus. QE is liquidity provision to insolvent structures so that they do not declare bankruptcy. They're all dead. They're all holding phony financial books. Their accounting is all kooky. Just for an example, this is a wonderful example, Deutsche Bank. There was a fellow at Investment Dynamics who did an analysis of Lehman Brothers before and after their death, and he determined that his conservative calculations were off by 2.5 to 1. He was conservative. He knew that they were broken and dead and insolvent and going to rupture. And they did. They died. But when the dust cleared, and it was quite, well known what their value was underwater, their negative, their red ink total, he was able to calculate, well, it was 2.5 times worse than I thought with my conservative calculations. He did the same kind of analysis using the same rules with Deutsche Bank and came up with minus $400 billion. And his 2.5 to 1 formula means that Deutsche Bank is worth minus $1 trillion with a pretty good estimate there. Most Italian banks are heavily negative, tens, 20, maybe 100 billion for some of their largest banks. The Spanish banks engage in tremendously phony accounting, and they delay the inevitable by holding on their books real estate portfolios at their original value, not their current mark-to-market value. Portugal's deep underwater with their banks. And what's really causing the nightmare now is the attempts to clean up Deutsche Bank while other German banks are in ruin, like Bremen Landesbank. The Germans don't want a bailout, Dave. They don't want a big national bailout, because a bailout, according to EU rules, would force bail-ins of individual accounts. And they don't want a rebellion in the South. And the Italians, they don't take a kick in the groin very well. They get up and they start throwing things and burning things and killing people. So they don't want that kind of rebellion in Italy, because it would spread quickly to Spain, Portugal, and France. All these banks, these big banks, are ridiculously insolvent. They've been dead ever since Lehman Brothers. QE is nothing more. Remember all the different phrases we had? We had liquidity provision at the Fed, and then a different liquidity facility at the Fed. And then we had so many that we called them liquidity alphabet soup.
Yes.
It was a lot of different liquidity facilities to make sure that the big banks that were all insolvent did not run out of cash. Well, what was the movement of liquidity for? It was the Fed buying toxic bonds that didn't have any value at all and giving the banks money. It was slush money. They were buying broken assets, impaired assets, worthless paper. And the banks were kept from going under. They prevented a failure. One bank after another. Every single major U.S. bank, major London bank, major French bank, major Spanish bank, Italian bank, and major German bank. Every one of them bankrupt. Kept going by an IV intravenous financial line coming from Bank of England, the U.S. Federal Reserve, and the Euro Central Bank. These are all dead banks. And you ask, what's the purpose of a stress test? Well, real easy. To deceive the public into thinking the banks are in good condition. There hasn't been a single stress test in a single country that turned out to be accurate, seen 1 year later with dead banks that passed their stress tests.
So how about the U.S. banks? We're talking about European banks. Are the U.S. banks in the same boat?
Well, yeah, they're even worse off.
So nothing was solved since 2008, where, of course, the Fed's out there, the president's out there telling us that everything is fine, the banks are strong, the economy's strong. You're saying absolutely not, where the banks are in terrible shape.
Well, the president has turned out to be a liar in chief. The Federal Reserve Chair has turned out to be an agent to supply funds for worthless bonds to their agent Wall Street banks. And nobody tells the public the truth. The truth is the U.S. economy has been in a deep recession ever since 2007. It never recovered. There's a fascist business model rule that if you're ever to describe the U.S. economy, you must call it a recovery. They go with the jobless rate that's really the unemployment insurance state level rate, and lots of people are falling off. The real unemployment rate in the United States is around 25%, but we're told that it's something like 5.8% or 6.2%. Yeah. Those are the percents of people that are collecting state unemployment insurance. And when they run out, remember the Obama administration a year and a half ago decided not to extend beyond 99 weeks and then not to continue the 99-week extension. So what he did was he said, this is really pathetic, but by discontinuing the extension to unemployment, Obama improved the jobless rate because those people fell out of the system and no longer were counted as unemployed, whereas before, during the extensions, they were continued as unemployed. The U.S. banks are in the worst shape of all, but they have a tremendous advantage, Dave, and you got to factor it in when you're looking at bank balance sheets. It's the narcotics, money laundering. The London banks, the U.S. banks, a couple of French banks, Deutsche Bank, they benefit enormously from narco money laundering that Langley does through the Afghan war. And all that's in jeopardy right now with the Turkish uprising, where they've objected to the U.S.-led coup d'etat because Turkey is one of the principal stopping points for the distribution line of heroin. If you're ever wondering why did Jeb Bush back out of the presidential race, it's not because Trump was insulting his mommy. It was because Russia interrupted the ISIS and Saudi narcotics line that Papa Bush was running, and that was used to fund the Jeb Bush presidential campaign. Putin and the Russian military interrupted it, so Jeb came up with a phony excuse to back out of the race. He wasn't doing very well anyway, but and he was being insulted as being a mama's boy, and he had no idea what was going on with the Bush family antics. The Bush family is probably the largest crime syndicate in the world, as far as assets under control. It's about $5 trillion. We're talking about 30 years of narcotics ever since the Vietnam War. Why did we get into the Yugoslav war, the Balkan breakup? Well, we decided we can go in there and capture, Kosovo and capture the Eastern European heroin, make sure it doesn't get into the hands of the Chechens and then into the hands of the Russians. So we've got a global monopoly, and the New York banks benefit tremendously. The Bank of America is Papa Bush's narco bank. That's his heroin and cocaine bank, Bank of America. And Citigroup is in charge of Panama and all the other, South American narcotics money laundering through Panama. So the American banks have an advantage with the narco. And if you think it's small, you're nuts. It's between 800 billion and 1.2 trillion a year. And the usual cut is something like 20% off that. So 20% off a cool trillion is $200 billion. So I've actually heard, Dave, this is hard for some maybe of your listeners to swallow, but I don't really care. I don't care. I just go and tell what's going on. And people who have blinders on who are recently coming out from under the earth with their ostrich heads stuck in the sand, they're coming out and I give them praise, but this is very tough to swallow. There's a lot of narco money running around, and it's keeping up the U.S. system. And it's involved with the Clinton campaign. It's involved with the Obama line. It's involved with the Bush II administration. There's a common thread through these recent administrations, and it's found in the State Department. The State Department is the neocons. The neocons don't change chairs. Obama had the same people from the Bush administration, the Bush II administration, running the State Department. Obama hired Hillary as his treasurer, as his state, what do you call it? Department of State, Secretary of State.
Defense, yeah.
No, Secretary of State.
Yes, Secretary of State, yes.
And the neocons continued in all their games, with the gun running through the Benghazi, Libya embassy. This is very hard for people to swallow, but the U.S. has kept going from narco lines, and Russia has interrupted that. And now, by making nice, by the president of Turkey making nice with Russia, after their economy basically went to hell in the following 8 to 10 months following the shoot down of the Su fighter jet, the Russian fighter jet by the Turkish military. The Turkish economy went to hell. Mm-hmm. Their tourism went down 80%. Their hotels along the coast turned out to be 95% empty. And Erdogan made peace overtures with Putin, and immediately the U.S. works up a coup attempt. This is threatening NATO. It's threatening the New York banks. It's threatening the Bush narco lifelines. This is what the United States has become following 2001 and the Patriot Act and 9/11. I call it the fascist business model. This is what the U.S. has become. The neocons are neo-Nazis. They destroy everything they touch. Every nation that we've been involved with in foreign policy, we've corrupted through narcotics, warmongering, and now the blowback is coming to the point where I think the United States is going to be tremendously isolated. We're going to be isolated for identification as a rogue nation.
I agree with that.
And they haven't even brought out to the table the narcotics yet. All they've done is slowly start to reveal Agenda 21 with chemtrails and GMO foods and fracking to destroy the groundwater systems and laced vaccines. These are 4 of the 7 bowls of poison that you read about in the Bible. I've identified 7 bowls of poison poured upon the earth. The last one that I've identified is the human garbage bowl. That's the Arab human garbage. By the way, there are 2.5 million. That's an old number. I should say in early July, the U.S. had brought in, without proper identification or processing through customs, the U.S. had brought in 2.5 million Muslims, mostly flown in from UPS aircraft. Bowling Green, population in Ohio, 700,000 people. Well, how did it suddenly get 70,000 Muslims? That's 10% of the Bowling Green, Ohio population. There are tens of thousands pouring into New Orleans. Every night, Obama is signing in more. Obama is not the black man's president. He's the Muslims' president. My black friend from Pennsylvania is a member of a black, it's kind of a chamber of commerce in Pennsylvania, Ohio. And she tells me, Jim, you know, it's amazing. I know dozens and dozens of black folks, and I can't find one who still likes Obama. He's not the black man's president. He's the Muslim's president. He's got Muslim curtains in the White House. He's got Muslims all over the place in undersecretary positions. Okay, this is what's come to the United States. He's, his marching orders way back. I read this back from my friends, my contacts. This was September of '08 before he became inaugurated, before he even became elected. His marching orders were to destroy the U.S. economy, destroy the U.S. dollar, infiltrate Muslims throughout our society, and do his dead level best to bring about, trade unions in the fascist state, New World Order, headquartered in Europe. He's done a tremendous job. Obama is one of the most successful presidents we've ever had, according to his agenda, the hidden agenda.
So let me ask you this. You mentioned war on drugs, and this just stayed with me throughout your whole entire conversation. When the American people hear that we're fighting this war on drugs, what does this really mean?
I never referred to war on drugs. I referred to the drug factor.
Yes, but we know that Langley is, using the drugs, and the United States is saying that we're fighting this war on drugs. So what
is it?
Yeah, what is that?
The war on drugs is basically a war on all the competitors to the Langley drug merchants.
Ah, I see. Okay,
they knock out the competitors. They install their own people in a certain country. They get all the banks aligned to do money laundering. They get the military to align with the U.S. military. And when you see those large helicopters overhead, they're not transporting people as much as they're transporting heroin. They might be moving some machine guns and grenades, but that's secondary compared to the heroin. The heroin, okay, the part that's very difficult for Americans to swallow, that I've tried to explain a few times, and I have sources to tell me this, is that the U.S. banking system for Wall Street, when they do their overnight accounting and they do their overnight movement of reserves, they move a lot of different things. They move treasury bonds, they move gold bars, and they move heroin packets. I'm talking about, 20-kilogram paper-wrapped heroin. 20 kilograms. The density is kind of similar to that of gold. This is absolutely astonishing. Our banking system is kept going by heroin reserves. I just had an incident. This is in my extended family in the last week. Someone in my general family had a daughter who had a heroin overdose. They did not want to hear from me. that this is largely from Afghanistan under our leadership, under our protection. We've turned Afghanistan, Dave, into a chemical factory with trucks moving the chemical products required to process poppy into heroin. We've got vertical integration of the heroin industry in Afghanistan. Now, you see stories of wild-eyed guys with their pants rolled up to their thighs, chewing on poppy, stomping on the white, pasty substance. That's primitive. That's the Colombian Hills. We've turned it into a chemical factory in Afghanistan. Hear me. $800 billion to $1.2 trillion a year. When we first started this war in 2003, they had approximately 100 tons of heroin. We pushed out the Taliban. I think there were 2 out of the 20 tribes we retained. And now it's 1,300 tons a year. We've increased it 13-fold under our leadership in vertical integration and industrialization. And we tell the American people we need more budgets and bigger funds to fight the war on terrorism. The American people have been turned into some of the biggest, most gigantic morons in the modern history of mankind. 10% of them are smart enough to see through the haze, the lies, the blur, and the din of the propaganda. And I give them praise. It's only 10%. Many of them are hat-trick letter subscribers, and I give them a lot of praise for not being deceived. But when you're told the statistics that under the U.S. you had a 13-fold increase of Afghan heroin production, and they want more money to fight the terrorists producing heroin in Afghan soil, I say you're an idiot if you believe that. The war on terrorism is a giant smokescreen. What they tend to do is turn a country on the defensive. They get them to move their gold and to move their reserves and to move their operations, and the U.S. through their Langley mercenaries and Langley hired, people with white skin as opposed to the Muslim skin. I know that's a silly term, but we've got white Anglo-Saxon Protestant mercenaries, and we've also got Muslim mercenaries. Langley has created the Muslims as mercenaries under the ISIS label because they thought that would fool the American public in a better way, and they're right, it did. I regard it as a new name, a new wing for Al-Qaeda, which was always under Langley's wing. So they get the movement in the country, and then the Bush family goes in and steals the gold. We stole the Libyan gold, 144 tons of gold. I don't think it was so much in movement. We got their leaders to be in movement and killed them. There's a lot of rumors out there now that Muammar Gaddafi is not dead, that we killed a double, but it's very hard to confirm this. I've heard that Gaddafi is running around free man in Zimbabwe. And I don't know if he's trying to produce a government in exile. I don't really care. He might want to just wait for the reset to occur and to take root so that he would have more credibility on some of the criminal activity that was devoted toward his attempted murder. I don't know. Maybe he is dead, maybe he's not dead. But the point is, we removed the government of Libya and turned it into a chaos zone. It's what we do. We turn their countries into chaotic zones where their urban centers are bombed out buildings, and we blame it on terrorists. We say that we're going in bombing terrorist strongholds, But I'll give you an example, a great example in Syria. We're always bombing something in Syria. We claim that these are ISIS strongholds. Well, since when is an electric generating facility in Aleppo a stronghold for ISIS? No, it's to cripple the city and wreck the whole Syrian economy on the western side. This is what we do. We turn cities to rubble and economies to wastelands. It's what we do, and we're very good at it. That's called the Arab Spring, and it's not the war on terror. The war on, the war on drugs, the war on terror. War on terror is intermixed with the war on drugs. Because we claim that the terrorists are involved with all this drugs, and with all their illicit funds, they're funding the terrorists. I'll tell you what a terrorist is, Dave.
Okay.
It's anyone who crosses the neocons running the United States.
I agree with that, Jim. Let me ask you this question about Syria. Since Russia, who stepped into Syria with the invitation from Assad to fight the terrorists, the Islamic State, the proxy army for the U.S., we see that the Islamic State is being, brought down to almost nothing right now. And the Russian forces, the Syrian forces, they're pushing the U.S. into a corner. What would be the U.S.'s next move in Syria? I mean, I understand that they're trying to work out this peace deal, ceasefire deal, but we know they don't want peace or ceasefires in Syria. What do you think their next move is in this country?
I think what's likely is different factions to step into Syria. There's something, it's a fascinating thing, but ISIS had a name change. They called it Daesh, D-A-E-S-H, Daesh.
Right.
Now they're calling it Al-Nusra. Okay, so if you change the name, you can convince sleepy, dopey Americans that this is a new player. No, it's just a new nameplate on the Langley subdivision. Okay, so what are they likely to do? I think what's likely to happen is the U.S. is going to run out of assets. I love that word. Assets in Syria. The assets include stolen oil fields. The assets include tanker trucks of oil in movement. The assets include a lot of weaponry. We're starting to see one story after another of weapons depots being blown up by the Russians. The Russians have unmasked not just the U.S., but Turkey and Israel, all working together behind ISIS. Where is the field headquarters command center for ISIS? It's the U.S. Embassy in Ankara, Turkey. So with the Turkish coup that failed, the purge that Erdogan is likely to conduct now could push out those people who are running the ISIS war operations in Syria, but running them from offices in Ankara, Turkey. This is very dangerous. I think the U.S. is going to be pushed into a corner, running low on assets. The last asset is the human soldiers. And they're really not just, Middle Eastern Arabs. No, they're North African Arabs. They're even Eastern European Arabs. I mean, like in old Yugoslavia and northern Turkey and parts of Russia, the Caucasus region. They might be Chechens. They're mercenaries. They want a job. They're having fun. and they chuckle incredibly when the Americans believe that those videos with somebody's head being cut off are real. Take a close look. There's no blood squirting out of the neck. There's no blood squirting out of the neck. You do that for a regular human being without video editing, and you see 3 feet of heavy, voluminous blood squirting in every direction before and during the head removal. And none of that is evident in the ISIS films. It's designed to scare the wits out of sleepy, dopey Americans. Now, the American consequence, the U.S. endgame in Syria is going to be resort to even more violent and more vicious guerrillas being hired who will insist on a new name. I don't care what their name is. They're all ISIS to me. They're all Langley/Israel/ISIS to me. My gosh, the Israeli integrated secret service, I can't remember it. ISIS used to stand for the Secret Service of Israel. And they didn't like the association, so they asked it to be changed to the Independent Syrian State of Levant, ISIL. No. Let's leave the close association to Israel because it's still there. Now, we got a complete snafu of all U.S. foreign policy because it's trying, like the devil, to hold things together for the narcotics and the counterfeit, I call it counterfeit, toxic dollar. There's not a whole lot of counterfeit going on, but there is some of the dollar. But it's the counterfeit. It's the paper-based system. I mean, the United States elites do not want to give up their ability to give themselves $1 billion for a weekend cruise. They're controlling the production of money. It's what they define money to be. It's not what history defines money to be. So by the desperate moves for holding together the monetary system and the narcotic system, the U.S. is going to earn itself unbelievable isolation, where a lot of nations just won't want to do trade with the United States. And then we'll start seeing some real serious shortages when the new dollar comes. But there's a lot of stories about the new dollar, and this is a very difficult area, Dave. Mm-hmm. It's hard to know. It's hard to know exactly what's going on. It's hard to know what the developments have been. It's hard to know what decisions are being made. Hard to know what offers are on the table. That these are very difficult concepts for building the next chapter for the United States. And I don't have all the answers. I do have a number of pieces that are quite clear, and some other pieces that are indicated, other pieces that are rumored to be in negotiation. But this is not going to end well for the United States. That there's a tremendous effort going on by non-Americans to bring about a soft, gradual landing for the dead dollar. I made a forecast 2 years ago. The dollar, as we know it, will rise and rise, then rise some more, then vanish. Because it'll become the black hole that attracts foreign funds. We're seeing it right now with the Treasury bond. We're down to 1.3%. It's going to go down to 1.0%. When I made this call, it was around 2%. I said we're going to head down toward 1.5%. We got there. It was a matter of several months. It wasn't a hard call at all. But by destroying foreign currencies, we will end up killing the entire paper dollar system, the entire paper major currency system. The dollar is not getting stronger. The dollar is rendering weaker the other paper currencies. The dollar is weakening versus gold. Mm-hmm. The dollar is weakening versus the off-market gold price, where money is paid to get large sums of gold, large quantities of gold. I'm not referring to COMEX. I'm referring to the off-markets, the markets that actually have moving metal. A market that does not move metal is not a gold market.
So when all this comes about, Jim, will the dollar actually exist, or is it going to be completely replaced with something different?
I think the dollar is going to be replaced. We have so many different scenarios. I'd like to review a couple. Oh man, it's very hairy, Dave. This is very complicated. If the United States does not get external help, that's the first premise, and that opens up a whole new arena, a whole new set of rooms. That there are other set of rooms where the U.S. does get assistance for gold provision. But in the large set of rooms where the U.S. is on its own, the U.S. is going to see ships come to port and be refused. The foreign provision, foreign ships full of, say, raw materials or finished products, I don't care which, I don't care what country, they're starting to turn down the treasury bills for payment now. We're getting, I believe, phony stories that at Los Angeles port we're told that there's, worker strikes and all kinds of other problems, so that there's a queue of 20 ships out there that are not unloading. The key is they're not unloading. The question is, why are they not unloading? And I believe it's much more they don't want the treasury bill dollar than it is workers who, object to some conditions or pay scales or whatever. So, the pressure is on in this whole set of rooms without external help for the U.S. to come up with its own dollar. I call it the Scheist dollar. And I kind of snicker when I hear other writers refer to the Scheist dollar, because I coined the term over a year ago, saying that the U.S. is going to be backed into a corner and will have to develop its own currency, launch it, and have it devalued, but pay for foreign shipments to the economy. The new Scheist dollar is a requirement in order to assure continued supply chain provision to the U.S. economy. Well, what would be the risk for this Scheist dollar? We have a trade deficit of $500 billion a year. Is anybody paying attention? Do those who read the New York Times, like my half-witted brother, do they realize that you cannot continue with a 40 to 45 billion monthly trade deficit that's $500 billion a year, $500 billion a year? What happens to a new U.S.-only dollar in that event? Oh, I'll tell you what, it's called devaluation. You devalue accordingly, and with something that volume, I think it's 30% every several months. You do 6 of them, you got 80, 90% devaluation of your currency. You do 5 of them, you got 80 to 90% devaluation of your currency. Then suddenly everything costs more to import in. And suddenly all kinds of foreign investors want to open up a new business in the United States, and they're going to be looking for income tax breaks and property tax breaks and new free trade zones established. That's how the U.S. reindustrializes. But, you got to back up here. Why cannot the U.S. launch its own domestic dollar right now? Why? Because the dollar is used in international trade. The dollar is the standard for, say, India providing information technology systems in Saudi Arabia. The contract's written in the dollar. The dollar's written in Bolivian metal sales, metal supply provision to China in return for domestic electronics, car parts, and motorcycles. The contract between Bolivia and China is written in the dollar. The contract between India and Saudi Arabia is written in the dollar. And that prevents the United States from doing anything. The United States now has its hands tied. The U.S. is now stuck, you can call it in handcuffs. I call it a straitjacket. Because the U.S. cannot do anything on a new currency until something is resolved on an international scale through huge, broad treaties to take the international contract payment system off the dollar standard. Okay, you have the dollar as the global reserve currency, which means they have treasury bonds and treasury bills all through banking systems. But you also have a global contract standard where the dollar is the medium, the terms of the contract. Okay, so what I am hearing, this is what Euroraj has heard from his London contacts regarding the Swiss. It's the Bank for International Settlements, which represents in Basel, Switzerland, it represents the mass of Western central banks. They are in conference and have been for a couple of months or more with the Chinese. We're talking about the People's Bank of China. We're talking about the Ministry of Finance for the government of China. And we're talking about a very important independent group called the White Dragons. Just think of them as ancient, very wealthy Chinese families, but not just Chinese. Asian wealthy families. It could have some Koreans, it could have some Vietnamese, it could have some Singaporeans. I don't know. Okay, what is this negotiation all about between Basel? I'll just call it between Basel, the BIS, Basel, which represents the central banks, and the Chinese group for all their financial interests, including sovereign wealth fund managers. They have trillions. Okay, the basis of their negotiation is to take the international contracts and swap them out of the dollar into gold. So the Indians would be paid from the Saudis in gold. So the Chinese would be paid from the Bolivians in a swap of gold for the metals. The Bolivians would make sure they had gold to provide China through swaps of their own metal reserves. Okay, the point here is that all global contracts would no longer be in the dollar. They would be in gold. And you can't do that without settling and agreeing upon, across the board, with all the principal parties. You know, like the British and the Americans would get their noses in there with the Basel bunch of the central bankers and let them know what their desires were about this or that, what they're willing to settle for regarding the dollar and gold conversion, but they're talking about $5,000 gold price. Okay?
So what I'm getting from what you're saying is they're haggling over the dollar and gold and what they're going to fix it as, what price they're going to fix the trade as.
Exactly.
Okay.
And when they fix that, then the U.S. will be in a position to create its own domestic dollar. And that domestic dollar will be devalued 30% right out of the gate.
So what about everyone that was holding the federal note right now in the United States? What happens to that?
I think they'll all be forced to convert to the new U.S. Treasury note. It's a Federal Reserve note. Pardon the noise here, it's a fire truck. It's the Federal Reserve note giving way for the new world in the United States of the U.S. Treasury note. It's the U.S. government with the Treasury Department taking control of the dollar from the expiring bankrupt Fed, which holds $4.5 trillion of worthless paper.
Wow. So
this is kind of amazing, isn't it?
Yeah. So let me just get my head around this. So the U.S., the dollar, will no longer be the reserve currency right now.
Well, across the world, right?
Across the world, yes.
Like in the South Korean banking system. They're going to be dumping treasuries and buying what? Gold. We're going to see the biggest stampede, dumping treasury bonds and buying gold that the world has ever seen. This is on the other side of the Basel Conference and negotiations to retire the dollar from international contract usage. Okay, like, India versus the Saudis. There are all kinds of bilateral examples. Two nations conducting trade. What are the contracts written in? The dollar. How are they paid? Usually in treasury bills. What do they do with the treasury bills? They stuff them in their banking systems. So it's a contract standard and a banking standard, all of which is going to go away and give way to gold. Now, that will put the global system on track toward a solution, but that will not be the solution. That will not be the remedy. That is a pathway. Because once you have a new dollar, you have a $500 billion annual trade deficit. How is that going to be handled? What are they going to... Okay, now let's switch gears here, Dave.
Okay.
I've had all of that based on the U.S. not receiving any foreign assistance toward the solution. Okay, now imagine the U.S. does have assistance toward the solution. But I should really say, let me just finish off the point. Given our $500 billion trade deficit, the new dollar will be devalued without mercy, 30% every several months. And we will begin to look like Venezuela with price inflation and massive, massive shortages, because we will be working like crazy to resolve our trade deficit by exporting everything not nailed down. And that will result in shortages. All right, now, enough of that. Let's suppose we have a foreign party, like the ancient Chinese families. They're reported to be sitting on between 110 and 150,000 tons of gold.
Right.
And it's not in the U.S. news because the dopey, sleepy Americans are not being informed in order for them to remain dopey and sleepy. I don't think they could wrap their head around the fact that the Chinese ancient families have 12 times to 15 times what Fort Knox held in gold reserves. Just think of, let me just give you a little sidetrack analogy. The Vatican basically was the only political organization for about 1,500 years. I'm talking about the fall of the Roman Empire to the Renaissance period, like the 16th, 17th century. Okay, so they accumulated a lot of wealth. There was a lot of mining, there was a lot of commerce, there was a lot of wars and crusades. So the Vatican accumulated perhaps 100,000 tons of gold. Okay. Well, the Chinese are a little bit older than the Vatican, like a few thousand years older than the Vatican. They've got between 110 and 150,000 tons of gold that I'm told could fill an entire football field chest high with pallets. Okay, this is an enormous amount of gold, maybe 2 football fields. We're talking about an enormous... All right, the Chinese have offered the State Department and Treasury Department of the U.S. government, they've offered them either 10 or 20,000 tons of gold. Let's just call it 15,000. Okay, they've offered to lend a formal lease to the U.S. government, 15,000 tons of gold, in order to back the new Treasury dollar. Not the Federal Reserve note. The Federal Reserve note is your monopoly money, goofy colored filament crap money, toilet money with all it's lacking are the brown stains. Worthless stuff. Okay. This could bring about some instant stability to the U.S. new dollar if there's a legitimate gold backing to it. But the missing piece immediately following that established new currency would be what happens, the consequence. to the trade deficit. That's $500 billion. The United States economy is bankrupt. When are we going to get our heads wrapped around this? We outsourced industry for 30 years. It was part of the Rockefeller plan. He wanted to turn the United States into just another country with a wage scale and industrial output that was more in line with an advanced third world nation. Congratulations, that's a mission accomplished. The United States has been gutted. I thought way back in the early 90s, wait a minute, we continue this outsourced movement. We're removing our legitimate industry and income. And Greenspan had an answer to that. Yes, but we're turning out to be a financial-centered economy. And we can offload all this risk with derivatives. Okay, Greenspan turned out to be a charlatan, a financial shaman, a smoke and mirrors nitwit. And he was paid an extra paycheck by Basel, Switzerland to wreck our system, to give us what we want, easy money. Okay, back to the provision of, say, Chinese gold to the U.S. What happens after the first year of a $500 billion trade deficit? China will want $500 billion worth of our assets in the form of farmland, factories, port facilities, office buildings, maybe a couple universities. What will happen in the second year? Well, there's going to be a lot more free trade zones and little businesses that start up with 200 people hired and making copper tubing, like a Birmingham, Alabama free trade zone business run by a 35-year-old Chinese guy who has tax breaks on income and tax breaks on property. Okay, so we will have some progress in the first year toward reducing the trade deficit. Let's say we have some really great progress, and we're all the way down to $400 billion in the trade deficit for the second year. China will demand $400 billion of our assets in the form of farmland, factories, port facilities, office buildings, and maybe a couple universities. And maybe we'll sell them the Grand Canyon. What will happen in the third year? Well, after 2 full years, we might bring the trade deficit down to $300 billion. And that'll mean that China will drain us of $1.2 trillion of assets in the first 3 years. This is how colonization happens, Dave. We're not thinking through at all what happens on the other side of the reset following the trade deficits, despite even a national initiative to bring about foreign investment. And let's make America great again. Let's make America industrialized again. Let's make America an exporter again, like the 1950s, before the Rockefellers got their hands on our national policy. If you haven't figured it out yet, I believe Rockefeller is the devil incarnate to destroy the American industry, to destroy the American, air quality, land quality, food quality, vaccine quality. That's their Agenda 21. Population reduction. In other words, genocide. Okay. Rockefeller is responsible for other things, a lot of little things, like reducing the quality of our wheat to the lowest junk level in our breads, pasta, and whatever for wheat. We don't use largely, there's a name for the type of wheat that's used for, the type of flour that's used for pizzas. I can't think of it. Anyway, he brought about a consensus among industrial companies in America to go with the lowest junk quality of wheat. And at the same time, shove in corn syrup everywhere you look. And the outcome to this Rockefeller Foundation plan is that we have a 50% obesity problem. that does not include the jackass. I am a cool 6 feet tall, 180 pounds. Thank you very much.
Nice.
I never eat pizza. I don't even buy bread. I do eat some bread, but I don't buy it. It's not in my refrigerator. Okay, so whether the U.S. is provided gold for a new currency or not provided gold for a new currency, we're going to have a tremendous problem because of our trade deficit. We're going to handle our federal deficit in a different manner. We're going to handle it by confiscating pension funds. All we need to do is confiscate $1 trillion a year, and we've got the federal deficit solved. And we've already been given a hint to that, how Obama was going to, he wasn't going to, he made movements toward having the federal government pension funds use a special treasury bond.
Right.
And it's not $1 trillion worth, but if they start zooming in on the 401ks and the IRAs, then you'll start hearing barking sounds from my sister's mouth. And finally she'll begin to get it. But I don't think so, because she'll tell me that they're perfectly safe, just like the bank accounts insured by the FDIC. Okay, there's a third wild card here, Dave, I'd like to touch.
Okay.
The U.S. could be on their own without any gold provision for a new shit dollar. I'm sorry, Scheiss dollar. Let's make it sound, above table. A Scheiss dollar. That's German for excrement, flotsam, jetsam, rubbish. I do have a few words in my German vernacular. We might have a Chinese provision through a lease, and I guarantee you it would not be a lease on U.S. soil, because we steal everything that we've ever leased. We've dishonored every treaty and dishonored every lease the U.S. government has been involved in the last 200 years. Okay, there's a third wild card. And just so people are clear, if we come up with this Scheiss dollar, we're going to lie and cheat and steal all the way through in declaring what's backing it. We're going to say that we have the strategic oil reserve behind this dollar. We have 25 giant natural gas storage facilities behind this new dollar. We have deep storage gold that might even include the Grand Canyon behind this new dollar. But it all becomes available for foreign confiscation after the first year and the $500 billion trade deficit. So here's the wild card third option. The Bush family comes forward and says, we'll lend you 10,000 tons of gold for your new dollar, but we've got conditions. We remain in control of your government. We remain in control of your banking system. And we remain in control of your security system, so nothing changes except you've got a stable currency now. And if you don't do this, we'll start murdering various people until you do agree to it. That's much more in keeping with the American way that we've seen since 9/11.
Jim, this is starting to make sense to me, because when I was looking at the new $100 bill, one side, the left side, says Federal Reserve note, and there's not much color there. On the right side, you see gold. The 100 is in gold, but something very interesting on the right-hand side when you fold the $100 bill. Under the United States now, the United States of America, it says, this note is legal tender for all debts and public and private. It's no longer under the Federal Reserve logo. If you look at the old $100 bill or any other bill, it was always under the Federal Reserve section. They moved it, which is quite odd.
Now under the U.S. Department of Treasury. So.
Yes.
Yes. I don't like the fact that it says Treasury note at all. I think eventually we're going to see something that says U.S. Treasury note, not Federal Reserve note. Then you'll know it's got some real change at its core. I want to see the Federal Reserve shut down.
Yes.
I want to see the COMEX shut down. I'd like to see a whole lot of other things I don't want to discuss, but those are two good starting points. As long as the Federal Reserve is involved, we will have Basel banker power over us. Okay, I'll give you an example. In the last few years, we've seen a lot of rules like, well, you can't have internal trading on your treasury accounts within the Wall Street banks. That was part of the Basel II rules. Now Basel III is saying you've got to have a certain percentage of capital maintained in your bank in Wall Street in order to continue doing business as a bank. That's called Basel III rules. Why is Basel giving rules to the U.S. banks? Why is a Swiss private bank giving rules to the U.S. banking industry? The answer is simple. Because the U.S. is not a sovereign nation. The U.S. is a vassal state under the Khazarian Nazi banker model with their financial power in Basel. And that's why Basel's negotiating with China on the global international contract centered in the dollar to switch it over to gold. I want to put Basel out of business because what they're going to try to do, Dave, is real soon start making a lot of noise about how the IMF and the special drawing rights basket of currencies that recently introduced or invited in the Chinese RMB, it's the dollar, the euro, the British pound, the Japanese yen. Now they got a fifth. They're moving their percentages around, and the biggest loser was the euro. The one most intact was the dollar. I got this wrong in a recent interview. I made a wrong statement saying that the dollar was going to give a lot of ground to the Chinese RMB. You know, it's the euro going to give a lot of ground to the Chinese RMB, and you're going to see a lot of euro bonds converted to Chinese bonds in order to facilitate this new percentage introduction. But what the elite in Basel want to do is to have the IMF produce the new major currency, a gold-backed super sovereign SDR basket currency of the five majors. And that'll instantly, as they claim, provide stability among the five major currencies, and you won't see much big fluctuations among the five on any pair. And that's pretty interesting, but I don't like the idea, and I think this is what Greenspan is hinting to regarding the world needs a gold standard. Yeah, we need the IMF to step in and save the day as the agent for Basel. I don't think so. I don't think so at all, because I'll tell you what they'll try to do. They'll try to say, Basel will hold all the world's gold, and if you want to participate in this, you got to hand over some of your gold in order to be collateral for gold trade notes to guarantee your trade payments, your trade shipments, your supply chain, payments for all that supply chain. And if you don't have gold, the Basel Bunch will lease you some gold, like to say Bolivia, in return for a nice big slab of industrial metals and maybe some strategic metals like, strontium, vanadium, titanium. Wow. I don't want Basel to be the global repository of gold in charge of a new banking system, a super sovereign IMF in charge. No, I don't want that at all. And I don't think Russia and China are going to let that happen. Because they've got a lot of gold, and they're going to have more liberal, fair, just rules for participation. They might have some swaps. We'll just take example Costa Rica. What's Costa Rica going to swap in order to guarantee some gold provision? Because they've got a trade deficit here. What are they going to do? Are they going to forfeit $1 billion of assets a year? I don't know. This is very complicated stuff. Very complicated.
When this switch comes where the dollar disappears, we're getting introduced to this new currency, is America going to continue on the way it is? People are going to continue on with their lives, or is it going to be a drastic change?
The introduction of the new dollar by means of the discontinuation in usage of the dollar in foreign trade, foreign contracts, and the discontinuation of the dollar in global banking systems. This will be a shockwave to the United States. The introduction of the new dollar. If they do it in very clever ways, like the Chinese have an arrangement of properties that they want to take after 1 year and take after 2 years, and then maybe after 3 or 4 years there won't be a real big trade deficit, so there won't be a big abandonment and forfeiture of assets to China. If they do it in a very stable and clever way, they might avoid the big devaluations in the first year. That's what they're trying to negotiate now, Dave. And I don't know how successful they're going to be, because the only way the U.S. gets some continuity without huge destabilization is if the U.S. gives up some control. And the neocons never give up control, whether it's banks or whether it's a war machine. They never give up control. So I don't know how this is going to be resolved. Right now, we've got no resolution. We have no agreements. I just hear about, step by step, we have some progress regarding Basel and China at the table. And the Chinese are holding very big cards. And the West is holding very few cards. Because, simply stated, most of the Western banks are insolvent, and most of the Western economies are in very serious recession. And most of the governments in the West are running huge deficits. And most of the economies in the West are running big trade deficits. And on the winning side of most of those items is China. They still have a trade surplus. They're still holding, $1 trillion plus in treasury bonds. They own 1/3 of U.S. urban commercial buildings. They own the Long Beach, California, Los Angeles port facility. Whew.
Wow.
The Chinese are at the dominant position at the trade talks table. I'm hoping for more stability and less control, some not forfeited control, but some bargained handover of control to the Chinese. So to the point where the United States can continue, but with a lower standard of living. We've already seen giant slices taken away from the U.S. standard of living. Just take a look at home equity. Take a look at fringe benefits for from jobs. Take a look at health care programs. Most people pay into them rather significantly and then pay again when they have some kind of a health problem and a bill. So we're going to have some serious loss to wages and fringe benefits. We're going to see some higher prices. The Chinese have made a very simple demand. Come up with your own dollar because you're wrecking the world dollar. And with your new dollar, we want a 50% devaluation. You've gotten a free ride for too long. How do you bring about a 50% devaluation? Well, I'll tell you how. It's very simple math. You do back-to-back 30% devaluations, space it apart a few months, maybe a year, I don't know, I don't care. You do a 30% devaluation, you preserve 70% of value. You do it again, you preserve 70% of 70%, which is 49%. There's your half right there. The Chinese have demanded that we have a new independent U.S.-only dollar, and it gets devalued because we've set up these imbalances where the U.S. pays for finished products and hard-earned commodities You pay them with treasury bills that Bernanke boasted we can do so at zero cost. I say if you do it at zero cost, it has zero value. We're giving them something worthless with zero value in return for ships loaded with stuff, and the world's not going to do it anymore.
Jim, listen, I really appreciate you taking this time out and being on the X22 Report Spotlight. Thank you very much. Once again, how can people see your work?
It's on www.goldenjackass.com. It's a silly, funny name, but you know, when I started writing about gold in 2003, a year before the website, a year before the newsletter, I called myself the Golden Jackass because I was coming out with some economic essays about gold. I didn't think that the Wall Street community had any idea what was going on with gold, and gold was not rising in 2002 and 3 because of the Palestinian problem, one of the dumbest things I've ever heard. It was rising back then because the prevailing interest rate went below the consumer price inflation rate. We had negative real rates. That's a launching fuse to light the fuse on gold. Okay, it's goldenjackass.com. If you go in there, you'll see a public domain, in other words, a free page. I have lots of links. I try not to do interviews unless I know that there's going to be a link to provide the followers and subscribers, clients to the Hat Trick Letter, because they need a little shot in the arm once in a while. These are very depressing times. People need to be encouraged, and I do so with these interviews to let people know they're on the right track with gold and silver. But the public page has a lot of interviews and some public articles that I write. I'm about to write another one right now about the banker bunker mentality. I've got some notes together from it. But it's also the home of the Hat Trick Letter that started in April of 2004. And I really didn't plan on getting much past the year 2010, but we've had a series of climax events, starting with the ruin of the pigs nations and their sovereign debt in Southern Europe, and moving on to things like, I forecasted correctly, by the way, the pigs' sovereign debt. I didn't know where it was going to blew up in Greece, but I expected Spain and Italy to be the center, and now Spain and Italy are going to be the climax. But I correctly forecasted move towards 0% in 2009. I correctly forecasted a move toward quantitative easing, the QE policy. I correctly forecasted a number of things, like I claimed that both QE and 0% would be permanent, never change, and that's becoming very, very clear. So now I invite people to go to the Golden Jackass website and sign up for the Hat Trick Letter. And I always like mentioning these two little things. The two nicest compliments I get. I was a member of your client list. I backed out in 2013, and I come back now in 2016, and I've read a few months, and I don't know why I ever left. I should not have left. And the other one was other compliment, and I get them every month. I get the compliment of, for the last 2 years, I've just been listening to your podcasts, radio interviews, and reading some of your public articles, and you're quoted a lot, and that's all really good. And I thought, well, what the heck, I'll sign up for your newsletter. And I realized, why didn't I do this 2 years ago? Okay, so I love hearing both. I hear them a lot. It's nice to hear. It's nice to hear it. It's an encouragement for me because I work hard at this, and I take a lot of shots. I get abuse from hate mail, and I got to tell you, it's down 80% compared to a year ago. I think the broken systems are quite evident now, and the dollar to go away is quite a clear path now. So, very interesting times. I love doing what I do, and I got to admit, I miss the marketing research. I miss analyzing enormous data sets. I miss doing statistical modeling and making conclusions and making business recommendations that result in millions of dollars in savings for our clients. I miss that very much. But I'm doing something that's really important, And along my years, Dave, I met plenty of people, and I'd say, well, you have a PhD in math, so what are you doing running a consulting firm and you're not using your math anymore? And the answer was, I'm doing something more important.
Yes.
I'm doing something that's historically very important right now.
Absolutely true.
So I revel in it, and thank you for having me on.
Thank you for being here, Jim. I really appreciate it.